And you, Miss Diana, how we feeling today?
Yeah, I'm feeling good today. It's been a very long and stressful week, but it's been
Mm,
productive, and that's always good. And I'm grateful to be alive to even be stressed and productive. So I'm gonna reward myself with some creamistry ice cream today. That's where I'm going.
that's ice cream. I might need that. Oh, that's a thought, y'all. That's a thought. All right. And I'm feeling okay. I didn't get no sleep last night, but it was a smooth week, just a difficult yesterday. Um, Getting things ready for school. I also teach at night, y'all. So I'm getting all things ready for, like you said, lead testing and all the things ready for the kiddos. So elementary is going a lot right now, as we all know, at the end of the year. All right. So that's all I have. Let's move on to our discussion. We ready?
We ready.
We ready. All right. So first question. All right. Can you give us a basic definition of sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual violence, and rape? And are there any difference between each other? Are they have their own definition? Give a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'll start with sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is behavior typically committed to minor children. If someone over the age of consent forces a minor into sexual interactions, and that includes exposing oneself, obscene messaging, um, sexual contact, child pornography, intercourse, that behavior would constitute as sexual abuse. And it's usually over a long period of time. Sexual assault often occurs as a one-time event, and that includes any sexual contact that is unwanted by the victim. Rape is only one kind of sexual assault, and it's the act of forced intercourse. Sexual violence is a non-legal term that's all-encompassing, and it refers to crimes like sexual assault, rape, and sexual abuse.
All right, thank you for sharing it. Because a lot of people I know use the word sexual violence as the most one, constantly using it over and over again. So to break that down is great. Thank you for breaking that down for us. Any thoughts on that about definition and word usage that we throw around a lot? Commonly used
Diana, I
word?
wanna I wanna clarify for my understanding and for those who might be watching, um, sexual violence is the term that does not have any legal weight to it, meaning someone couldn't be charged for sexual violence, but someone can be charged with rape, sexual assault, or sexual abuse. Is that, am I understanding you
Mm,
Yes,
correctly?
that is
Okay.
correct.
learning something too. I didn't know that. Okay. All right. All right. I'm pretty sure the audience learning something too. All right. So our next question.
So I will be asking you the next question. What are some indicators or signs we should know and be aware of involving sexual assault?
Yeah, so some indicators of sexual assault, and I'll speak specifically to the youth, since that, y'all are focused on the youth. So from age 0 to 11, some indicators are changes in emotions and behavior. They may cry, throw tantrums for no obvious reason. Bedwetting is a big one, that we see often. They may be either clingy to their parents, or they may be more quiet and more distant, but it's a noticeable change, right? Um, Another biggie is pain when going to the toilet. Symptoms of UTIs and STIs, there may be discharge, bleeding, and then there's also difficulty walking and sitting. Um, in teens, it's a little different yet similar. So with teens, they may have bags, clothing, jewelry from an unknown source that you as the parent possibly didn't buy them. So that may be a form of grooming in teenagers, or being involved in a relationship with someone older. Getting involved in risky sexual behaviors is also another indicator of sexual abuse in teens. They may have trouble developing and maintaining relationships, whether it be friends or intimate partners. They may be showing signs of aggression that is out of the ordinary. and they may have low self-esteem, and they may avoid particular people or person, which also may be a sign of sexual abuse.
All right. So one thing that spoke to me when you talked about the clinginess to adults or not wanting like to be supervised by adults, something that really clicked with me. Um, I really feel like that's something that I sometimes may notice with youth of color also who have trauma. So I'm glad you highlighted that. It's something we should always be aware of. Um, and probably mood swings or different things happening. So I'm glad you noticed that. Is there anything else that she said that kind of highlighted with y'all?
I know for me, what resonated the most is really the warning signs. In our field, it is really easy for us to not approach each youth with fresh eyes because
Mm,
they come to us with a story, right? So we think we know. And the fact of the matter is we don't. And unfortunately, we also know that kids in foster care or supervised care settings are at an increased risk for abuse, or sexual assault. And so while we do our very, very best to keep them safe while they're with us, it's possible that, they go to school or they go to work and then abuse or violence is occurring. That means we still need to watch out for these signs and not assume that the story that's on the paper is their story, because we know that it's not, and um, but it's always important to stay vigilant, to stay aware, and to look for those signs, and not also because past trauma is no indication that future or present trauma is not occurring. And so that's why it's important for us to know, and everyone to know, even if someone has told you that they've experienced abuse or assault, we kind of stop looking.
hmm
We just go, okay, well, that happened. We know that you are a survivor of this. And so we're just going to attach everything to that and not look for new signs that something else is going on. So that's what I'm taking away from that.
Yeah, and for me, the grooming part, working with teenagers, especially teenage girls, we've seen many times some of our girls be groomed, leaving and being gone for days or coming back with money. Um, and I know that that's an area where we can improve because we don't know how to effectively work with that population. Many of us are not able to recognize those signs, and some of us are. Um, and so, yeah, I appreciate you touching on that. So the next question, what are some do's and don'ts we should know of when we are a victim of rape or for people who are victims of rape?
Yeah, so after a sexual assault, the first thing that we ask when someone calls the hotline or calls for help, we ask, are you safe right now? Is your perpetrator around? Are you in the house with them? So we safety plan and we try and figure out what to do, what the next steps are in order to keep you safe. And if the perpetrator can come back, what can you do? So usually we'll say, call law enforcement. If you feel unsafe, call 911. So yeah, that's like the first step. Um, After a sexual assault, if you must change your clothes, keep your clothes in a bag for evidence. Don't wash your hands because you may have evidence under your fingernails, and not to use the restroom. Try not to use the restroom. I know that could be hard, but and then also don't shower or bathe. And then usually when we get them to the hospital, we kind of explain the process of the safe kit or the rape kit. Um, and afterwards they'll give you medication. So you get 3 antibiotics to prevent STIs such as chlamydia, gonorrhea, stuff like that. And then they give you preventative treatment for hepatitis B, and then preventative treatment for HIV, and that's the prophylaxis. And that is long term. It's like something that you take over the month. So you have to make sure that you take it on time. So I kind of explained that to our survivors. And also Plan B for people who can get pregnant. So those are the things that everyone should know getting into the hospital and after a rape. Just general knowledge. Unfortunately, that's something that everyone should know, just in case you are put in that situation and they're able to collect evidence properly. Another thing is that I completely lost my train of thought. One second. Another thing is just allowing them to make their own well-informed decisions. It's really important to educate them on sexual assault and what happens afterwards, the steps that you can take, your legal rights, what you can stop a safe kit at any time if you feel uncomfortable or you're in pain. You do not need to report to law enforcement in order to get a safe kit. So that should be told right before, right? So that you know, hey, I don't have to report if I don't want to or if I don't feel comfortable to, right? Yeah.
How important is it for those who have experienced an assault to contact an advocate before contacting law enforcement?
Mhm.
So it's a little difficult to say because at STAR we have the hotline, so they can call the hotline immediately. But the first thing you would think to do is call 911. So say they're in a situation where they call 911, they go to the hospital, and usually the same nurse will call us and dispatch us out as their advocates. Usually if they call us, we will tell them to try and find a ride, or we will try and get them a Lyft ride because we partner with Lyft to get them to a hospital first. So that would be the first step, is getting to the hospital. If they do not want law enforcement involved, we'll work around that. And usually they'll call us first before calling law enforcement. But law enforcement is absolutely not necessary unless they are a minor. So I always tell them, if someone calls, I tell them if it's the abuse of a minor or if they are a minor, I am a mandated reporter. I have to report it.
Mhm.
So that is something that I tell them beforehand. And if they don't want me to to be involved or to call the police, then I can kind of walk them through, hey, okay, this is what you do anonymously. So that's the beauty of our hotline, is that you can be anonymous and get assistance without, without knowing that you might be called, the police may be called and involved.
So to clarify, you're saying that once a person goes to the hospital, you all are automatically contacted by the personnel at the hospital?
Yes, we are, if it's a sexual assault.
Perfect.
Oh, perfect.
Can you share information for the hotline, the contact number?
Yeah, of course. I can put it in the chat.
Okay.
I hope, if we're recording, y'all can kind of see it. Maybe the host can pull it up, but I'll definitely put it in the chat right after, so everyone has it. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. And as
I just
Harry,
want to, I'm sorry, Thomas.
go ahead.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciated you saying, Diana, uh, giving them the ability to make informed decisions. I think um, it's important to give the space to restore as much autonomy as possible after an act which for the purpose of stripping you of your personhood. That was why it happened. And so as soon as you can, start sharing power with that person to say, you are still human, you deserve your dignity, make this decision. I'm not going to make it for you. You are not weak, you're not incapable of advocating for yourself. I'm here to hold your hand while you do it. So when you need the support, you have it. Um, and hopefully that is enough. And I think if more people approached sexual assault from that space, we might have more people feeling more comfortable with reporting. I do know that the reporting channels and then subsequent activities can feel harrowing. It's a lot. And, after something traumatic happens, a lot of us want to just have silence, sit in silence and not deal with it. And that's normal, that's natural. Um, so I definitely get the urge and the desire for people wanting to hold space within themselves
Mhm.
before inviting others into a space of vulnerability. However, those who have the privilege of being invited on that journey, it's important to remember that your sole job is to promote their dignity as much as often as you can.
Thank you for saying that, Ms. Faulkner. Because oftentimes that's feeling of freedom. That's feeling of the ideal that, I'm safe. The safety has been lost when that happens. So giving that person, that young person, that freedom to say, I want to tell or I want to share this, I need time for myself is very important. That autonomy once again. So I'm glad you said that, Ms. Faulkner. When you were talking about Diana, I think I heard something about a rape kit. Is that going to be free for them or that to be a price?
Yes. So legislation has passed that all safe kits are free. So if the only extra charges you may get is that if you're injured, say you broke an arm and you have to get an x-ray, that would be an extra charge. But we can help you through that and see what we can do. We can contact crime victim reparations also to help assist with that. But the actual rape kit itself, you should not be charged for it. And also you do not need to call law enforcement to receive a rape kit. And they would just keep it in the custody of the same nurse and in the, I forgot what it's called, but it's like a place where they put the safe kits, and it is there. No one will touch it unless you are ready to call for it. If you want to report at that time.
Perfect. I know a lot of people wanted to know that information. So we'll move on to our next question. All right. So we are living in a world where we are less informed about rape culture. All right. Can you provide us some information around what is rape culture and also some examples when we see it, let's say at a workplace, some in music, maybe college campuses? Like, give us some examples and also what is rape culture?
Yeah, so rape culture is a culture where sexual violence is treated as the norm and victims are blamed for their own assaults. It's not necessarily about the individual act of sexual violence, but more about the cultural norms that surround it and the institutions that protect rapists, shame victims, and demand that women make unreasonable sacrifices to avoid sexual assault, right? We see that with her skirt was too short, so that's why she got raped. That's not right at all. Another example would be supporting athletes who were charged with rape and calling their victims career destroyers, or people believing girls allow themselves to be raped. There are journalists who will report a sexual assault and they'll substitute out the word sex for the word rape. So not calling rape for what it is. Another example would be calling college students who report their rape liars. So that's why a lot of people don't report, because at the end of the day, if I'm going to be called a liar, then what's the point, right? That's how people feel. And then on top of that, only 3% of rapists ever serve a day in jail. So there is no consequence for a sexual assault and rape. So that is part of rape culture. And then also people assuming that false reporting for sexual assault cases is the norm, when in reality is only 2 to 8%. So over 90% of cases are true and they're disregarding it. And that's rape culture. It's the culture surrounding it.
Thank you for that. Any thoughts on anyone?
Definitely. I have thoughts about what you said regarding the way women dress and, society pushing that as justification for a woman's body being violated or a person's body to be violated. I think that it goes to show that it's time for society to change the way women are seen. Prior to women, the women's rights movement, women were seen as property, which is why we took on the husband's last name, and that meant that pretty much a man could do pretty much whatever they saw fit with a woman's body, and so it's still evident in the constructs of the society that is the idea when it comes to women, and so I think in order to really see a change, that we have to deconstruct that and rebuild it and repair it to be what it is today, which is women have the right to say no. I have the right to dress as I feel without having to be concerned about how that is perceived by someone in the community.
I read something the other day, and I'm sure y'all have seen this quote, and I'm about to butcher it, but I'm not about to look it up to get it right. So, uh, but collective trauma over time becomes culture, right? And so I think for us, and I can only speak about American culture, obviously, but ours is rooted in patriarchy, and which is this idea that one power can be centralized and then it belongs to one chosen person, and the people in power get to describe what that person looks like, and that shows itself time and again in different forms in almost all aspects of our culture. I wanted to speak a little bit about what rape culture can feel like on a personal level, because I think when we hear these terms, they are very broad, they are very general, and the first thing a person will say is, well, I don't believe in rape. Well, nobody believes in rape. Like, that's not a thing. Like, if you ask someone, do you think murder is right, nobody will say yes, right? um so they're gonna, person is gonna immediately kind of take themselves out and not see where they perpetuate this culture. But it looks as when a youth or person come to you with a allegation, and the first question is, "Are you sure?" And while it seems innocent, that question plants a seed of doubt. And think about it, a person who has experienced abuse or assault, they are already doubting themselves, because they're trying to figure, like, why did this happen? And they may not know, so that act of even saying it is one that's very courageous. And if the first response to that act is attempting to get them to confirm that what they just said happened to them happened, can plant seeds of doubt, which then has ripple effects. And so that's how rape culture can show up. And so I encourage everyone to examine how they interact with survivors, and when, another form of that is even during the process, we say things like, well, I know how difficult it is gonna be if they have to report this. Um, okay, but aren't you there to help them? Like, that's like, yes, we know it's gonna be difficult, but is it more important to take every opportunity to educate everyone? And that's what taking these allegations seriously can do, because there may be, a situation where you have a young the assault the person who's responsible for the assault really did not grasp, they haven't been taught consent, they don't understand what consent really is, and so in their mind they didn't commit assault. Okay, let's just start there. But we have to have the conversation. We can't immediately shut it down and say, well, this person says that they didn't do it, so you must be lying and there's nothing we can do about this. Right. No, let's have the conversation, let's have the process. And it's not shying away from accountability for all involved is how you start to pull out these roots that are so thick and insidious.
And you said a important word, Miss Sokoa, accountability. And I want to ask Miss Diana about the music that we listen to, that we see and we feed into. What's some accountability you think that music videos and artists may not know that they're doing, but also put into the universe of rape culture? That's a difficult question. We'll see.
It is a difficult question because a lot of people can argue they have artistic integrity, right? They can do what they will, but they have to understand that as an artist, you are affecting the culture. And so whatever you put in your music videos, whatever you put in your lyrics will affect the culture, right? So say an artist like Kendrick Lamar, he talks a lot about the struggles of being in poverty, of coming from Compton, but he speaks in very positive ways, and that has affected the culture, right? Whereas someone who, I can't think of an artist right now who, I don't know. I can't think of an artist right now who is affecting the culture negatively. There's plenty, but I just can't pinpoint one right now. But they may, have inappropriate images in their music videos, knowing that kids are watching this. It's very readily accessible on YouTube, right? So just taking in they need to be held accountable, maybe not legally, but by societal standards, right? Us as a culture, as a society, need to decide on what is appropriate, what is not, and understanding that this is not for children or kids who do not understand the mature nature of the music video, and they need to be held accountable for that, right? Did that make sense? That was
It makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And as a media person, I'm big on the influence of content. So that's why I asked that question. I had to sneak it in because I'm always making sure that what is created, it has good intentions and it's actually being affected, and and making sure that it doesn't fall into those things of rape culture, right? And things
Right.
like that.
And I love the word that you used, intention. And when you create art, and I'm an artist, and so when I create art, everything I put into my art is intentional. So when you put something that is derogatory towards women, what are you trying to say? What is the context of your art? And a lot of times there really is no context. You're just being derogatory. So yeah, intention.
I also want to highlight that intention too, and just as an extension of how pervasive rape culture is. A lot of the music I grew up on was blatantly misogynistic, right? Like there's no way to get around that. And it's a struggle. I will not lie. When certain songs come on, I'm like, I cannot anymore. But oh, that beat. Okay. So
Yes, yes.
it's a struggle. However, you know, what that was, they were a product of their environment. This is a very anecdotal story, but the rapper Jay Electronica was on Twitter and he responded to a question about, am I a racist? And he was like, I grew up in America. Of course I'm racist. And like it's because these are things that are in our culture and it just comes out. And so, but if you're not conscious about what you're saying, you're just gonna speak as you're normal, as you're used to normally speaking. And so a lot of that in the music is just art without intention, right? And you can hear the changes of society in some of the popular culture now, because you'll hear rappers say something sexual and then they add the caveat, but only if you want to, type of thing. And it's not so much that they, like, somebody told, you could tell it was natural because that's just where the culture is now. The culture is moving there. And that's not everyone. We still have a long way to go, but it's there now. Before, that wouldn't have even been thought to have, no one would have thought to utter that. Is you speak what you live, you speak what you see. But it's that intention. And as culture changes, intent without thought changes. And we're trying to move people to intent with thought, constantly thinking, being conscious of what you do and how you say it.
Yeah.
Definitely. I appreciate you mentioning, how basically art is an imitation of life. It reflects what people are experiencing and what's going on in the culture. So I don't think that artists have the intent. I don't think the intent is to cause harm. I think the intent is to continue the culture and be a part of the culture. And we have to realize, though, that the culture itself is harmful. that is where the harm comes from. So it's not the person, it's the culture. And so when we start doing the work to change the culture, then naturally people will change. And as Ms. Bowden used, now only if you want to or if you like, it's the lyrics. And so that's a glimpse of the culture beginning to change.
You're right. You're right. You do see that in music lyrics. You do see that even in movies. The script is saying that now. When we have love scenes, making sure the woman is, or the feminine person there is, leaning more into it. It's a thought process. It's more of a consent. It's more actively written and shown. And also, it's all over media images. You see magazines, you see different things. So, as a media person, I'm always looking for those little things. So I'm happy we had this little conversation. Yes, yes. Now let's talk about trauma with our youth. Let's talk about that. Let's switch over to that. Unfortunately, many of our youth are victims or survivors of rape. What are some emotional and mental side effects? Do they sometimes display trauma or some things that we may can just identify?
Yeah, so sexual violence trauma has a long-lasting effect, right? Sometimes for a lifetime. So specifically, sexual assault in adolescent years could significantly affect both the structure and the function of the brain that can last into adulthood. And you can see this manifest itself into PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And teenagers are more susceptible to turning to drug use and self-harm as coping mechanisms. You can see this trauma manifest itself through, they may be having trouble at school, or they may have trouble creating meaningful friendships and relationships. But yeah, those are some of the things that you would definitely see, especially in youth, when after a sexual assault.
Thank you for letting us know that. Anything else from anyone? Something that I always consider is making sure we are aware of people's emotional state, checking in, youth, adults, anyone. We all have different baggage, different stories, different histories. So I'm always aware of, when they have a breakthrough moment or a breakdown moment, where's that coming from? So making sure we're very aware of that when we see that when we're dealing with youth. And, it might go back to that, or it's just a thing we should be aware of. So I'm big on it. All right.
You said awareness, and that is I think the most important role we have as community members is being aware of the changes we see in our neighbors. Because whenever we go through something, I don't care how hard we try to remain normal, our behavior changes. When we're overwhelmed, our behavior changes. When we're sad, our behavior changes. There is no, you can put on an act, you can put on a face, but your behavior changes. And so it is very important that we are aware of what is going on with our community members. So that's our friends and family members as well.
I love it.
What are action steps that parents, teachers, social workers, youth care workers can take to ensure youth safety to prevent sexual assault and rape? And the second part of that question is, what are the action steps we can implement to advocate for youth victims afterwards?
Yeah, so some things we as adults can do is educating children on the importance of boundaries, right? Educating students about their rights, about what they can do after a sexual assault. Another research also shows that teaching children basic life skills, conflict resolution, and coping skills can positively affect their self-esteem and confidence. And just building relationships with your children or the children around you in order for them to have a deep trust where if anything happens, they know that they have someone, an adult who has their back, who will advocate for them, right? And some action steps that we can take as people in the community, adults in the community, is advocating for policy change at the campus, state, and federal levels to ensure meaningful systemic action, right? Changing legislation that protect perpetrators. That 3% of people who are, sexual violent criminals, that's insane. 3%. And I definitely think that systemic change at a higher level needs to be something has to be done, basically. And another thing is safe sex education in schools. A lot of states are still teaching abstinence as sex education. And the reality is teenagers have sex, and we would rather them be safe, know boundaries, know what consent is, know how to use protective sexual condoms or whatever it may be, contraceptives, that those are very important things that they need to know, right? And it's just ridiculous that we're still teaching abstinence in over I think it's 17 states or something like that. Yeah. But yeah.
I'm happy you said that because, me being in education, I'm big on making sure we provide all forms of education, and progressive education. And what's hardening is these laws and policies preventing teachers to even discuss sex ed in public schools, in educational settings, when that's actually the thing they need. Because when they go home, that's probably what they think about, all type of things, right? That's fun, but that crossed their mind. So to not have that resource for the adults to provide to them is really affecting them, I think, alone in many ways. So definitely sex education.
They should not, Google is not their friend at that point.
Exactly.
No, warning soapbox, but I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was going to be my, answer. More education is needed at an earlier age. I'm a big believer in going upstream to find the source of the problem. And from my experience being interpersonal violence educator, working with young kids, a lot of people just don't understand, which the evidence is borne out in our society, but a lot of people really don't understand the basics of what a healthy relationship looks like. And these include topics of consent. These include topics of how to speak to each other, how to treat each other, the boundaries of physical touching. All of these things are a part of sexual education, relationship-based education. And if our only uh, goal is to avoid, we're not educating anything because you can't avoid forever. Something is going to occur. And especially when we take into account that we are within a culture that places a high value on power, then you cannot present something as only available to a select group of people, which is what abstinence only sexual education does, because you will inevitably have people look at that as something that belongs in a power struggle, which it does not. The second point that they constantly give for not having abstinence education or sex education in classes, well, that should be handled by the parents. But you're not having that conversation because you want to avoid it. Like, you don't want to talk about sex because, well, they're just not going to have it because I told them not to, as if you can control what they do when they're not with you, which you don't, which is why we're dealing with teen pregnancy and all these other things, because that obviously is not working. And so, yeah.
Right.
Soapbox off.
Right. And the conversation of sex it seems so taboo, right? And as an Asian American, my parents never even uttered the word sex ever. I had to learn for myself. And no, learning from your peers at school is not the way to learn about sex at all. And so I really, really try and fight for sexual education, because that is so important. And we just shouldn't make sex so taboo, because everyone does it. It's a natural part of being human. And so you should learn how to have sex with consent, with boundaries, with protectiveness, with love and care, right? That's what sex should be. And or for fun, whatever floats your boat, right? But that conversation shouldn't be taboo, in my opinion.
And we living in the age of social media, so kids have access to everything. I mean, my 9-year-old, about a year or two ago, he came to me asking me about X videos because someone at school mentioned X videos to him. And I'm like, well, son, I was pretty much an adult when I found out about X videos. So, just the exposure so young, it goes to show that we have to change the way we function in our educational settings. And a lot of it is that parents still carry the practices of their parents. So as a parent, my parents didn't talk to me about sex. So I'm not going to talk to my children about sex. And at least my children to go out and get that information from somewhere else and be misinformed. And so I challenge parents to think of themselves at their child's age. Mama said no, so no means you need to go see what that's about. No to children is yes. And so we do not remember how we were at that age, we are in trouble. So it is definitely time for sex education to be a part of the curriculum and open conversation about everything.
Yeah.
Bring back Dr. Ruth.
Oh, yes, Dr. Ruth.
Mhm. And I think she worked because she was such a, she was a little old lady, but she talked about sex, but she talked about it honestly, without reservation, without judgment. And I don't know her whole catalog because, somebody's going to be like, no, she said such and such. It's possible. I don't know. I think I was like 5 or 6 or whatever when she first became a thing. But that's what I remember of her, where she really attempted to educate and not make it so taboo. Because once you take something out of the taboo, people begin to see themselves in what you're talking about, and then they were like, wait, I'm a rational person, so I can look at this rationally versus looking at it as some otherworldly monster, and now they have
Yeah.
to, they don't know how to deal with it, and unfortunately those taboos carry on into adulthood. A lot of adults, and myself included, once they get into their healthy relationship, they spend a lot of that relationship unlearning poor things that they learned from the culture about how to relate to people and what sex is and what sex is not. And I know we hadn't talked about this, and I don't know we will, but the idea that a husband could not rape his wife lasted so long that I think there are still people who just don't believe that to be true, because I can't make it make sense. I'm not gonna try, but that they still to this day don't believe that can be true, and these things don't just go away because you choose not to believe it. You have to do more than choose to believe something different. You have to bring people with you and educate and say, hey, no, there's a better way to do this, y'all. Let's just try something else.
Yeah, I'm happy you said that. And to add to Miss Mary's point, another thing I also feel is not making it comfortable in southern areas, in social settings during the South, we don't make it comfortable or normalize talk about sex publicly. I think that's also another thing why we have these policies and legislations not having that in schools, because we also as adults don't feel always comfortable having that conversation in public settings. So why we fight as a kid or youth and teenagers. So I think changing it also, making it more normalized, making it more comfortable to talk about sex in open settings, will hopefully make a mind shift and progression. Um, so things for the future. So let's move on.
To add
Go
something,
ahead.
that's the next question. That Mr. Cole said about, the idea that husbands cannot rape their wives. It goes back to it's your property. So you cannot violate your own property. And so I add again, it is time for us to change what we consider norms, and challenge them, because that is very outdated.
And you have some truth in it. Definitely the idea that women were property, it still sometimes linger. And like you said, some marriage laws and some people still say that can't happen. So I'm happy y'all both mentioned on that. It's really huge. It's still happening almost every day. So yeah, that's it. Let's discuss grooming. All right, let's discuss that. What is grooming? And also, what are some signs and indicators of grooming? How can we know that we are being groomed by somebody?
Yeah, so grooming is the act of preparing a teenager or a child for sexual relations, basically.
Mhm.
Usually it comes from an authority figure or an older partner. Um, and sometimes it may come as online grooming or from social media. We know that there are a lot of sexual predators with on social media who are targeting children. We've seen that in the Baton Rouge area, right, where young girl was talking to a older guy, and he was talking to her for a long period of time, and finally, we know the story. But basically, signs of grooming is how is secretive. They're secretive about how they are spending their time. You might see them trying to hide their phone or their iPad, trying to delete apps, like TikTok and Instagram, deleting messages, stuff like that. Another sign of grooming is teenagers having older partners. So, 15-year-old dating a 25-year-old, that's illegal for one and extremely inappropriate, but that is a sign of grooming, right? And another sign in children is understanding, they have an understanding of sex that's not appropriate for their age. Um, Also another sign of grooming, and we talked about this earlier, where they're having phones, new clothes, new jewelry, and you don't know where they're getting it from. Um, you know, it's probably from someone older or someone who is trying to groom them. And also underage drinking and drug use is also another sign of grooming.
Yeah.
I want to speak to how grooming just like the whole concept is just so to me,
Mhm.
when I first really learned about it, because it's sexual assault and abuse is such a violation. However, the phrasing puts you in the mindset of a violent betrayal, and
Yeah.
grooming is not necessarily violent in the sense that it doesn't come violently. You're not in a position, you don't know that this is happening to
Yeah.
It's
you.
very gradual and subtle and over,
Yes.
Mhm.
so you don't
Yes.
notice it until it's usually too late, right?
Well, to yes, and that just like,
And you
and
don't know that
I'm
person's
such a
planning it.
right. I'm such a prevent type person. I'm so prevention. This is one of those things that is very difficult. It does require a village of people to help mitigate someone who's decided to groom a person in your village, because that person is not going to see it. They're just not, and
Mhm.
because it starts with the trust. And it's so interesting to me because I preach connection, connection, connection. This thing starts with that. It's a connection. It's a perverted connection, and I hate that so much. And it's just it
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
everything in my body go ugh, because you just don't know where it comes from. And if someone decided, God forbid, knock on all the wood and all the other superstition, that if they put my children in their target, and there's someone at school or someone that I wouldn't think to question, it could happen to my son. It could happen to
Mhm.
anybody that I know. It could happen to adults, because again, it's taking that trust and then perverting it, and it's just so insidious to me. It's so scary.
Um, Go ahead, Miss Mary.
I wasn't. Go ahead.
For me, as a teenager, one thing I'm saying my mama gave me a long time ago is I always see the intention of an older person talking to me privately, right? She always told me that, especially men, but even women. At 16, 17, she told me like to be careful of like constantly talking to people that's older than you by yourself in private settings. Just see what it's about. Maybe it could be genuine, could be just a mentor, right? But not always. So be aware of the older people that's trying to get you in private places alone. That's one thing I would consider part of grooming. That my mama always sat me down and talked about, because I was always trying to go different places. But she had to make sure she gave me the information as she set me off into the real world. Um, so I think about that. Like, did I really understand that at 16, 17, 18 about who was really trying to spend time with me alone? Um, so yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and also to that point, and I talked about it a little earlier, but it's about building that trust with your children to where they can come to you if they feel uncomfortable with another adult. So if my niece or nephew comes to me, they're like, this person was kind of weird. I can then I can then be on alert, right?
Right.
And notice what's going on. And so building that trust with your children definitely can help prevent that grooming because they trust you to protect them, right?
Miss Timeless, I'm happy you mentioned, men as well, because oftentimes when we think of rape and sexual assault, we think of it happening to females, women,
Mm.
or young girls. And so I'm interested to know, what does rape look like or rape culture look like among male victims? And what advice can we provide to those males who may have experienced that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, male rape victims are extremely underreported due to the social stigmas surrounding male rape and male sexuality after a sexual assault. Um, so it's very underreported. They say 1 in 10 rape victims are male, but it really could be more, and we're just not hearing about it. Um, for gay men, 46% have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. So I'm sorry, my cat. So something that we can do to support our male survivors, we can be more inclusive by not gendering sexual assault and acknowledging that there is a social stigma surrounding male sexual assault and figuring out how to address it on a societal grand scale, if you will.
I want to speak to that a little bit. One thing I learned over my years is you never can identify who actually was experiencing sexual assault till they share it, right? Oftentimes just going to barbershop, sometimes going to salons, just spending time in both all places, you just never know how it affects people. And men is always to me, something we always forget about sexual assault. So many Black boys, so many Latino boys don't have an outlet to express that, don't have a place they can say, this happened to me, right? This happened to me. And they grow up. And since I don't always have places as well to share that with, so I'm happy we had this conversation about it.
And I'm happy you mentioned, boys of color, little boys of color, because we clearly have a culture issue within our communities anyway. Because sexuality, especially when you talk about male on male encounters, that is still very taboo in many cultures in the US. And so our boys don't feel safe. They don't necessarily have that safe space because we further push this idea of toxic masculinity, meaning you just deal with it, you get over it. Boys don't cry, boys are not allowed to show emotions or vulnerability. And so oftentimes what we get is anger. And then we sit back and we try to figure out why this person is so angry. But we don't really want that answer because the answer to that question is not going to be one that fits what the culture has pushed.
I'm so happy you said that because how many times have we known that the culture don't always support men when they say, hey, I've been sexually assaulted? And like the toxic masculinity, like they say that we have to suppress that. They say that they have to keep that in, take that on to someone else, and that comes out in so many other ways. And so many Black gay boys have a fear with police to even let anybody know, and have a fear with just saying out loud that somebody touched me. I don't care if it's your teenage age or a grown man is gay. In the gay community, it's a hard thing. You're announcing sexual rape, an assault and violence. So I'm happy that at least we're having that conversation, and hopefully other organizations have that conversation. We need to have policies and even advertising around men having support around being raped themselves. So yeah.
Anything else anyone wants to add with that question?
All right. Advocacy for trans folks. So I want to talk about some things. What some social barriers? What is some things that is challenges for trans men and trans women, gender conforming folks, when it comes to advocating and finding justice for being sexually assaulted?
Yeah, so trans folk and non-binary people face victimization across their lifespan with higher rates of sexual assault. Barriers faced by trans survivors when accessing sexual assault services are broken up into 4 different categories. It's interpersonal, organizational, institutional, and intersectional. So interpersonal barriers are how individual people may choose to interact with trans folk while receiving support. So not being treated with dignity by their advocate or not as an equal, right? Organizational represents cultures and norms in organizations that may create barriers. Examples would be like misgendering, not having the correct genders or options to list their genders in the I guess what's it called, like the statistical database. So institutional barriers such as healthcare and legal barriers. So not being able to use their preferred name legally. Barriers for trans folk also intersect with forms of oppression such as classism, racism, and ableism too, right? So yeah, there's a lot of barriers, and institutions should definitely be working on that because I see a lot of barriers as an advocate.
Yeah, and I would say also for my trans sisters and trans brothers, they lost trust in humanity sometimes. They lose trust in community because often community sometimes don't value us and don't see us in a proper light, right? As sisters and brothers, community people. So oftentimes one of the barriers is just even vocalizing we've been hurt, right? So going to someone and announcing this is sometimes a hard. And then once you get there, they say, "Oh, that you kind of in a way saying that this is something you brought on to yourself by being different, right? This idea of othering, being thrown away from society." So yeah.
I think, from my experience is when you are so firmly married to the idea of non-existence, then, or as Thomas said, othering, then it's easy to dismiss harm of any sort, right? Nothing can harm you because you don't exist. And I think that's the biggest barrier to that. This is I guess kind of a tangent because it's not specifically dealing with sexual assault, but I've been listening a lot around the advocacy regarding the school bills for trans youth, and none of it makes sense, but it's rooted in the idea that when you hear the explanations of that is going to do away with women's sports or is going to do away with kids sports, and it's like, well, that's because you've decided that these group of youth don't exist. So if it, again, if they don't exist, then they can't have rights and they can't be harmed, and so no harm, no foul. And that's just not how life works. And that is a battle that I don't know how or what we can do to fix that. But that's the central point that we're coming from. And I do believe that it's important to if you are an ally or a safe space, that you constantly announce yourself as such, because you never know where that person is going to come from that needs help, that just needs someone to listen to, someone to, you may not be the advocate, but you know what number to call, right? So being that safe space for someone, a trans youth, a trans person who's been assaulted, they're like, well, I don't know if they're a safe space, but I know this person in that space is safe, and I know I can call them and they can get me to the right place. And so I think that's, for me, the most important, or not the most important, but one of the things we can do is to make ourselves a safe space for people.
Mhm. For me, I think when you say that about, um, othering, and what I said about othering, another thing is too, there's this sense of there's no one to run to. So having that person, like you said, that's a safe space that you can say, hey, this is happening to me. Oftentimes trans folks feel alone. And also feel like that they're not part of anything that is community life outside their own community. Um, so I'm big on that, and I'm happy that you brought that up because we got to change some things. We definitely got to change some things. I think conversation about this is the first start, and then all of us as advocates all figuring out how to move forward. So, yeah. Any more thoughts on that one? No. All right. So for our closing, I want to give you once again a very much a thank you, Ms. Diana, for coming from STAR. Is there any STAR upcoming events? Can you tell us more about y'all services that you provide and how can we reach you?
Yeah, so I put the STAR hotline number in the chat. So I don't know if y'all can see it in the recording, but you can check us out at star.ngo. We don't have any upcoming events now because of COVID, and we're still trying to transition over to going back to the office and, from working remotely. But some of our services, we have our advocacy team, and we are here to provide emotional support and to accompany you to hospitals, court accompaniments, police accompaniments. So we also have a counseling team who are amazing, and they work with our clients for long-term support. We also have our community education team. So if you're interested in trainings for your workplace or wherever you are, or just a group of friends, you can sign up at star.ngo. And we also have our legal team who assists with pressing criminal charges against perpetrators, and they're amazing, and they all do amazing work. So yeah.
Yes. And everyone go follow STAR on their Facebook and Instagram. Also volunteer with them. I volunteered with them a couple of years ago. Great organization. Please, y'all, they need all the help they can get. We all need help that we can get. So I thank you, Ms. Diana, for getting us information about this sensitive topic. All right.
I also want to thank Diana for coming and having a conversation with us. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be so thorough, and thank your cat too. We appreciate its present, and hopefully we get to say, hello, sweetheart. Thank you.
Yes.
Because cats and our animals have gotten us through this year, so we we need to highlight them. But STAR is doing some incredible work right now, especially with making sure our college campuses are safe. And so it's important that we support them in any way we can. And even if it's just giving them an opportunity to educate and compensating in some way for their time and their expertise. I have a lot of good work is done by people without getting paid. And there have been times in my former life as a volunteer, a sexual assault escort, I've had doctors and police officers defer to me because sexual assault is such a specialized topic. And I'm like, I am not paid as a surgeon. I am here for support. I cannot do your job, sir or madam. But that shows you how much people need individuals who are informed about this. And it's important to, we all can't be uh, experts on everything. And that's why we build out a collective. That's why we build out our village, because I'm not the best at emailing long documents with lots of bullet points, but Miss Mary is. And so I give her that information and she can
Excellent, excellent.
and she can communicate that to people. And I joke with Miss Mary, but the we need people who can handle aspects of our lives and our days that we can, and that's why we build these coalitions. That's why we make connections, so that we all can play a part in making this world safer, making this world healthier, which is the ultimate goal in my mind. So thank you again, Diana, and send all your colleagues a big hello and fist bump from Youth Oasis.
Yeah, I also want to thank you as well, Miss Diana. You definitely gave a lot of information, educating the community and us as an agency. That's the seed. So you planted the seed, and we must continue to water that seed so that that information can continue to grow and get out in more communities. Um, and I hope that we were able to help someone. And in closing, I also want to read the hotline number for those who may be watching. So that number is 855-435-STAR. So again, thank you. And thank you everyone at STAR for all of the amazing work you do. All right.